humans, vampires, ghouls, werewolves, Protestants, Catholics, Schrodinger cats, and
Nazis.
Hellsing is a vampire story unlike nearly any other that combines historical fact, theory, and some of the most famed literature of all time into one bloody, disgusting manga. I have already read and recently reread all of the Hellsing manga, so today we're talking about Hellsing's story, characters, inspiration, and author. By the order of the Royal Protestant Knights, welcome to Hellsing.
I want to suck your blood! It's twilight time! Time for blood sucking!
Kota Hirano's vampire manga, Hellsing, began running in the seinen manga magazine Young King Hours in April of 1997 and wrapped up in September of 2008. Hellsing's first chapter, Vampire Hunter, quickly introduces us to our three most important characters. Alucard, the vampire/hunter sent by his master to stop a vampire vicar in Cheddar Village, last surviving member of her police station, Ceres Victoria, and the namesake of the manga, Sir Integra Fairbrook Wingates Hellsing, head of the Hellsing Agency and Alucard's one and only master. Lucky fucking asshole. Watch me become a vampire, I'll be Integra's favorite. I really appreciate how quickly Hirano gets our main characters established and how this first chapter, and some to come, can be read as their own little horror stories before the main plot kicks off. The second chapter establishes how Integra became the head of Hellsing at the betrayal of her uncle, and how it led to a reawakening and binding Alucard to her will as he was being kept in the Hellsing basement like one of those old-timey ellipticals your parents inherited from their parents. You know, just feed it some blood and it's working again. The third chapter kind of feels like a redux of the first. I'm not going chapter by chapter though for like every chapter in Hellsing, just to get ahead of this. While in the first chapter, we just got to see Alucard take down a vampire and get an understanding of the Hellsing Agency's goal, in this chapter, we see how Ceres has evolved after becoming a creature of the night. Alucard having turned her, she now hardly feels the recoil from her massive rifle and can see through the night like it's high noon. Also, while we'll see Hirano's art change and more so improve a drastic amount as the series goes on, here we see his unevolved but still very unique style. The character designs are incredibly distinct, especially Alucard with his goggles and wide-brimmed hat. The exaggerated poses and postures almost feel like the horror version of Araki's glitz and glamour poses, and the guns are beautiful. And after chapter 3 is where Hellsing really kicks off.
And the world's gonna know your name. What's your name, man? Alexander Anderson!
Chapter 4, the first of a three-part story called Sword Dancer, introduces us to the Catholics of Hellsing through Father Alexander Anderson. Section 13, Iscariot, is the Catholic Church's answer to the Protestants at Hellsing. I don't know how caught up on the politics of Christendom you are, but Catholics and Protestants have had a bit of a troubled relationship. Sword Dancer shows us for the first time an actual threat for Alucard. Like how Superman is weak to magic, Alucard is weak to insane Catholic magics, like blessed silver bayonets or teleportation Bible pages. This is where we see Alucard and Anderson's rivalry begin, promising Alucard that the next time he'll kill the Protestant. And the vampire part too, sure. And with the Catholics, Protestants, and their insane respective monster squads established, we are ready to meet the true villains of Hellsing.
Who is that?
It's Mac, dude. This better be good. Holy shit!
In Hellsing, even if you're a crusading Catholic, a member of the British government, or the most powerful vampire of all time, you are still less of a monster than a Nazi. The Leitstetts Battalion, or the Last Battalion, are a Kampfgruppe of Waffen-SS soldiers, who sacrificed what hollow, rotten souls they may have had to become vampires. We're introduced to the idea of this group at the conclusion of the 4-chapter Dead Zone story arc. When vampire brothers Luke and Jan Valentine attack Hellsing, leading an army of ghouls, vampire-created zombies, on Hellsing Manor. Luke Valentine takes on Alucard, telling him he's not one of those instant vampires, which will come back later. But in the meantime, Alucard shows him the horrors very comprehensible.
It's time to educate you on how a real vampire does battle.
Like, you know, a ghost dog with a gun is weird, but I can definitely comprehend it, which makes it worse, arguably. Jan leads his ghouls to the Round Table Council meeting inside Hellsing Manor, and is immediately lit the fuck up when he gets there. This is why you don't rush the bomb site alone, Jan. Just before Hellsing can put him down, Jan Valentine explodes into flame. But as his body chars, he gives the dumb shits at Hellsing a hint. The name of his commanders, Millennium. And the chapter concludes with our first, albeit shadowy, look at our true villains, ending with Einwehr Herr Kommandant Heil. I like that Hellsing takes advantage of how truly evil German just sounds. With a new, all-encompassing threat on the horizon, Hellsing attempts to at least glean information from the Vatican through Section 13. This is where we once again get to see my baby boy, Alexander Anderson, with one of the best full-page spreads in the first deluxe volume. But we also meet Father Enrico Maxwell, who I would certainly call the largest non-Nazi villain of the series. Anderson may be a holy bayonet ready to vanquish the foes of the Vatican, but Maxwell is a misogynist.
You call my master a sow and expect me to let you live? I'm afraid that I'm just going to have to put a bullet in you.
Maxwell reveals to Integra, after forcing her to choke out a please, that Millennium has been funneling troops, resources, even plundered family heirlooms out of Europe since the beginning of World War II. Hellsing takes place in the 90s, just for reference.
No one told you life was gonna be this way.
Maxwell knows about this since the Vatican apparently helped them considerably, and gives the location of their vampire-producing facilities to Hellsing, hoping that these sinners will destroy each other. Alucard and Ceres, along with the mercenary group the Wild Geese, take a trip down to Rio de Janeiro for a covert mission, where they are immediately framed as terrorists and attacked by Bope and a dripped-out vampire. We get a great sequence of Alucard flexing on these regular human attackers, showing off his mastery over minds and pure powers of carnage. They may as well be made of tissue paper. And Tubblecane, the vampire dandy on the Millennium payroll, attacks Alucard and Ceres with a set of deadly playing cards.
Damn it, never falls!
And Tubblecane's name itself is a reference to the descendant of the biblical figure Cain, the first murderer. Tubblecane, however, becomes a blacksmith and is known as the first blacksmith of brass and iron. We'll get into more later, but Hellsing is littered with these references to classic literature, historical fact, theory, and even religious texts. Even if this one is a little random, honestly. Ultimately, Tubblecane is defeated by Alucard and then burned in the same fashion as Jan Valentine. But the following 3-part story, Age of Empire, is where we get our first true look at our undead Nazi villains. Through Maxwell's inquisition upon a bishop of the Vatican, the traitor reveals that he met the Major at the conclusion of Operation Barbarossa, the Nazis' failed attempt at invading and conquering the Soviet Union, and helped him smuggle men, arms, weaponry, and plundered treasure to South America, under the promise of eternal life. This bishop describes our main villain, the Major, in 2 contrasting ways, painting a beautiful picture for this pathetic yet horrifying commandant. Awfully short for an SS soldier, let alone officer, with a pudgy, even obese frame, a leering grin with unpleasant eyes, but who spoke as if he were a commander of Hell's own minions. The Major wishes to savor war. This war, the next war, and the next. An endless downfall of bloodshed. And they're on their way to reintroduce themselves to their fellow Nazi commanders also hiding in South America. Here we learn what has given the Major such command within the remnants of the party, acting on the orders of the late Fuhrer with his Special Operation 666, even going by the acting Fuhrer to the chagrin of the old guard hiding in their caves. We also meet the Major's special lieutenants known as the Werewolves, who become architects for action set pieces. Rip Van Winkle, Zoran Blitz, the Captain, and Warrant Officer Schrodinger. And with these commanders and an army of 1,000 vampirized Waffen SS, the Major seeks to savor the joy of war limitlessly. For this war and the next on the next. And with the audience having had a formal introduction to our villains, it's time for our protagonists and Maxwell to meet them. In a meeting to discuss this new threat between Hellsing, British High Command, Iscaria, and even the Queen herself, it comes to them. Schrodinger arrives with an iPad, I guess, to give the message to their foes, allowing the Major to speak directly to them and to witness them kill the other Nazi officers. I wonder if this is the first time the Queen of England has seen a cat femboy? Or does she know about these? And the first act of Hellsing ends with one of my favorite manga reveals I've gotten to experience fully unspoiled. The Leitstas Battalion is heading to attack London. Why couldn't anyone else attack London? I would support literally anyone else attacking London. This is where Hellsing really starts going and never stops moving. The invasion of Britain, Operation Sea Lion 2. Beginning with Millennium's premier sniper, Rip Van Winkle, named after the titular character of the classic American tale, where a man gets so plastered he sleeps through the entire American Revolution. Rip Van Winkle, with the help of her supernatural musket and a ship full of British turncoats, takes over a Royal Navy aircraft carrier, even defacing it with a swastika on the flat part of the ship. The second and third volumes of the Hellsing Deluxe Edition, which I read this in, are basically just two very long, unbroken action sequences, so I won't be getting into the plot specifics as much, but this manga is so fun to read, guys. Hellsing doesn't really feel like reading any other manga, partially because its inspirations are mainly in classic vampire literature and real historic fact, but it even feels structurally different. While Hellsing 2001, the Hellsing Ultimate OVAs, and Hellsing Abridged all have their fans, I still do not think a true adaptation of Kota Hirano's work has been created. I think Hellsing would best be done in a two-movie adaptation, a duology as they're known among us film buffs. The first film will cover a majority of what we've discussed so far, maybe with some things condensed if we can't fit all of this into 2 hours or so. The conclusion of the first film will be the reveal that the Leitstas Battalion is heading to conquer London. The second film will begin with the action sequence that begins the second volume of Hellsing Deluxe, Alucard against Rip Van Winkle. This is one of my favorite action sequences of the entire manga. Hellsing abides by nearly every rule of vampirism, including the little-known one that vampires cannot cross running water. So, Alucard having to get to an aircraft carrier at sea in order to whoop ass is an interesting problem for the series to solve. Alucard nosedives into the carrier with an experimental stratospheric jet, the EXP-14LE, having brought his coffin along to subvert the running water rule. Alucard, of course, defeats Rip Van Winkle with incredible art and very cool dialogue to accompany it, and that's how I'll be describing most of these fights from here on out. There really is no way for me to properly express to you how amazing these action sequences are to see and read. The OVAs couldn't even pull it off in my opinion, so I'm just not gonna try to, but I will give you pictures. Bit of a raw XD random thought, but what I think Hirano and Hellsing itself really understands about vampire media is how inherently horny it is. We see it earlier with Cerys drinking Integra's blood from her pricked finger, and here with Alucard feeding on Van Winkle. Like, this is basically porn. Chapter 34 ends with Alucard defeating and consuming Rip Van Winkle, including her fellow Nazis hitting her with a Rip Van Winkle, and finally seeing the lights of Europe after half a century of hiding. The SS are practically licking the windows on their airships when they see London, and the remainder of the series is basically one long, horrific action sequence. See, the Latestas Battalion does not want to conquer London as much as they want to burn it to the ground. Beginning with a launch of V-1 fighter jets into Parliament, city centers, that big dumbass clock they all worship, the Nazis' assault on London is one of the most upsetting and awful things I've seen in any manga. There's a thought process of feeling sympathetic for the Nazis, perpetuated by soulless freaks like Douglas Murray, that the Nazis actually felt really super bad about their bloodshed and slaughter. But Hellsing's heightened depiction of their evil is far more accurate to the walking demons they were than that idea. Chapter 38 depicts the Latestas Battalion's ground assault on London, set to lyrics within the text as they shoot into crowds with abandon, toss grenades into piles of barely alive civilians, and literally eat babies. The SS attempt to capture Sir Integra and very nearly do, but drive Anderson to save her, and slaughter the Nazis trying to take her back to the Major. Anderson is doing this against the orders of Archbishop Enrico Maxwell, who has himself ordered Iscariot to capture Integra. And while watching London burn in a sea of fire from the coastline of France, Archbishop Maxwell, with his new authority, launches the Ninth Crusade. Joining the bloodshed in London will be 340 members of the Corlin Brethren of the Sword, 118 members of the Order of Calatra la Nueva, 257 members of the Sacred Military Order of St. Stephen of Tuscany, and all 2,457 members of the Knights of Malta. See, now if I were some sort of old loser, this is where I would include that Monty Python clip of the Spanish Inquisition thing, but I'm not. I'm young and hip and vibrant. Riz and aura and so forth. While Integra is being escorted by the Catholics and Alucard is slowly drifting back to London on the ruined aircraft carrier, Cerys has her best action scene of the manga. Cerys, throughout the course of the series, has gone from a police girl to a fledgling vampire still afraid to drink blood, to now an insanely powerful markswoman with all the strengths of being a vampire as well. Zorn Blitz, the tattoo Two-Face of the werewolves, assaults Hellsing HQ, while Alucard is still adrift at sea and Integra is in proper London. In it, but Hellsing Manor is being defended by Cerys Victoria, those remaining at Hellsing, and the Wild Geese mercenary group. And Zorn's full name, Zorn Blitz, is a great little reference once again to the actual history of World War II. The Major orders Zorn to wait for him and his troops to arrive to actually engage Hellsing and their forces, but like her namesake, the Blitzkrieg, a term for Germany's overwhelming battle aggression in World War II, Zorn Blitz is unable to help herself and attacks. This is one of my favorite action sequences in the manga overall, and Zorn is an extremely intimidating villain, even introducing new powers to the series. This is also the best showing for the Wild Geese and their leader Pip Verndad, and is, above all, just an amazing action set piece for Cerys. Zorn and her airships launch an assault of V1s like the Major did on London itself, and they're all shot down by Cerys in her new personal anti-aircraft gun, the Harkonnen II. Zorn even attempts to directly crash into Cerys after their Zeppelin is rendered inoperable. And Cerys switches to incendiary rounds before they get a chance. Once grounded, it's time for Pip and his wild geese to show their talents. When going against an army of super strong, super fast, nearly unkillable, but very maimable targets, what do? Landmines. You do landmines. The Blitzkrieg force is severely hindered when they first encounter the landmines, and then, once stopped, face a full payload of manually detonated explosives. See, Pip would be a Penny Parker main. He understands that the only defense against a dive comp, our modern equivalent to the Blitzkrieg, is an overwhelming amount of landmines. This is only a brief delay in the SS and Zoran's assault on Hellsing Manor, however, as Blitz uses her illusion powers, seemingly having something to do with her half-tattooed body, to apparate a massive version of herself over Hellsing, even appearing to split the building in two. It would be really funny though if those tattoos had nothing to do with her powers and she just kinda wanted to look cool. That's actually my new headcanon now. Sarah sees with her vampiric third eye, shaking herself of the illusion, sniping Zoran, and getting Pip and the wild geese out of theirs. But it's too late. These soldiers and Zoran have reached Hellsing Manor, slaughtering wild geese, doing blind taste tests of blood types, and pinning heads to the walls. Zoran can even use her illusions to put people back in their memories. First with a Hellsing commander seeing his dead daughter, and with Ceres takes her back to the night where, as a child, she watched her parents be murdered by home invaders, before Zoran wakes her up, lopping off her arm and blinding her with her Soul Eater scythe. Pip Vernadad, in one of his last moments, shoots Zoran and saves Ceres. Ceres returning the favor by feasting on his blood and whooping the fuck out of Blitz. And Warrant Officer Schrodinger pops up in Zoran's mind to let her know that they're actually downsizing at Millennium and she's being let go, but luckily Ceres is already doing an MK11 Cabal fatality on her. So, Ceres flies back to London with massive manifested wings, finding the dawn approaching, and we rejoin the main source of carnage to the Major celebrating with glee. We rejoin the action in London just in time to see an angel? The Vatican, via Archbishop Maxwell, is arriving with massive air power, here to purge London of its heretics and freaks. I feel like Maxwell is a lot more excited to kill any Protestant than the vampire Nazis, which is concerning. And this is where we get the one story development that I really don't like that much. The Hellsing Butler, also known as the Angel of Death and the Trash Man of the Order of the Royal Protestant Knights, Walter C. Dornez, has turned to the Nazi-made vampirism. It is heavily implied that this may have been a decision Walter was forced to make. We see the beginning of his fight with the captain, but not the actual moment where he's turned. But this version of Walter just feels like an entirely different, worse character than the one we got to know. It doesn't feel like Hirano wants to commit to him having always been a traitor, or him being forced into vampirism. Now, back to the stuff I like. Archbishop Maxwell launching the 9th Crusade on London forces Anderson to choose his side. And in a decision I really like, Anderson is vocally against this proliferation of bloodshed by Section 13. As Crusaders gun down civilians from their helicopters, Anderson states that Maxwell is no longer serving God, and only power. And just as Maxwell is basking in his wanton slaughter of the heretical English, Alucard drifts back to shore, narrated in recounting a section from Bram Stoker's original Dracula. Once, a vampire came to England to get a woman he personally desired. The vampire sailed aboard a schooner. The schooner dashed from wave to wave through the fog at unbelievable speed. The entire crew was killed. And so, the ghost ship, fully laden with corpses and caskets, made port in London. Her name is the Demeter. In Russian, the Dmitri. Alucard, having arrived back in London, kicks off the true finale of Hellsing. with 572 remaining Leitstes Battalion members, 2,875 members of the Ninth Crusade still fighting for the Vatican, and for Hellsing, the Order of Royal Protestant Knights, 3 remaining members. With his master's permission, Alucard seeks to destroy all foes, SS and Iscariot alike, activating Control Art Restriction System, Level 0.
Here standeth the bird of Hermes, eating mine own wings!
Alucard faces off against the Major and Anderson with their respective forces behind them. Alucard, having fully released his restriction system, means that every single person he has ever killed is fighting with him. From Bope members to knights, Ottoman soldiers, and even the vampires we've seen him face and feed on. And Alucard himself appears as he did in his first life. And from one of Gambit Vampire's playing cards, Archbishop Maxwell's helicopter is brought down. He crashes to Earth but finds himself safe from the hordes of London ghouls until Anderson. In the chapter after Maxwell's death, we see when he first arrived at the orphanage he grew up in, having been abandoned by his parents for being the child of a mistress, telling Anderson himself, "I need no companions. I will become great and look down on all of them." And to end off the second deluxe volume, Anderson meets Alucard for their last confrontation.
Nicely done, my nemesis.
I am a servant of God.
This is a great fight. Alucard and Anderson go head to head until Anderson is holding up his own arm with his mouth. Alucard even admires his human spirit, the strength of his relative weakness. And the remaining Iscariot members come to assist Father Anderson, until he can play his trump card. Anderson reveals Section 3, Matthew, from the Vatican's Reliquary of Holy Artifacts, a nail, presumably one of the nails that put Christ on the cross. I love this twist, not only because Catholic relics are insane, fascinating, and insanely fascinating, but my favorite thing about this development is how genuinely sad Alucard looks that Anderson will become a monster like him. Especially because he now knows that Anderson won't be a worthy foe to defeat him. Alucard must be killed by a human. Anderson also has tons of fantastic monologues in the series. His dialogue is right up there with Alucard's for my favorites, but the one right before he pierces himself with the nail and gives up his humanity is just perfection. I just need to be a bayonet. A bayonet named Divine Punishment. I wish I'd been born a storm, or a menace, or a single explosive. No heart, no tears, just as a terrible gale'd been good. And if with a pierce of this, I can become that, then so be it. Amen. It was very difficult to not do the accent. Anderson becomes a horrible creature of regenerating thorns, a sick little Easter egg to the Roman cops torturing Jesus. The new inhuman Anderson and Alucard fight, and Anderson nearly wins. In the moment before what would be Alucard's death, we see his beginnings as a human boy, having been abused by the church in the classic way, let's call it. But Ceres, the police girl Alucard wasn't even supposed to turn into a vampire, saves Alucard in his last moments. Alucard does a puke and rally to regain his strength and end Anderson, saying he would have given him his heart if he had been a human. And in his last moments, as he fades away into nothing, Anderson seemingly regains a bit of his humanity, saying he can hear the voices of the children at the orphanage. And then Walter desecrates Anderson's body in its last moments, making him not only an enemy of Hellsing, but of Iscariot too. Alucard faces down Walter C. Dornez for their first and final confrontation. Integra and Ceres Victoria go to take out the Major in his airship, and Alucard turns into a girl? I'm not sure why he did that. Even though it's a close match, Alucard demonstrates that Walter's unnatural SS-invented vampirism is no match for his organic, non-GMO vampirism. But honestly, I don't think their fight is that interesting. Let's move on to the more interesting part of the finale, please. We finally see the backstory of the Major, the lengths he has gone to create all of this, to create this perfect opportunity to kill Alucard. In flashback, we see him and his Nazi comrades defeated by the Red Army of the USSR. The Major, assisted by Doc and Captain, just barely escapes with his life. After witnessing some of Alucard's power before his death, but rejecting the call of vampirism, he has found an archenemy for his forever war, and laid the dominoes for this moment for the next 50 years. Alucard recalls all the lives he's dispelled to fight these massive armies back into himself, as the Major smiles and snaps his fingers, declaring, "I win." Warrant Officer Schrodinger, like his namesake Schrodinger's cat, is a self-observation which possesses its own will, meaning he can be anywhere he wants at any time, so long as he perceives himself there. But what happens if Schrodinger no longer perceives of himself? Alucard recalling his lives creates rivers of blood flowing back to him through the streets of London, and Schrodinger, slitting his throat with a Nazi dagger, dives into the river, distributing himself over Alucard's thousands of lives. And the Major happily declares that Alucard is now nothing more than a cluster of imaginary numbers. In the meantime, while Alucard has been fighting Walter and becoming a weird, intangible, imaginary soup, Ceres has been fighting the Captain, now revealed to not just be a werewolf, but a sexy werewolf.
Oh no, he's hot!
I don't like Ceres' fight against the Captain as much as I like her fight against Zoran Blitz, but there's still a lot of great stuff here. The Captain's werewolf powers have a cool, kinda ghost twist on them. He's like some kinda spirit werewolf. I really enjoy Pip Vernadad returning through Ceres to help her out and hype her up for the fight, and I just love where it ends up taking place, in the bowels of the Major's main airship, where they've stored every piece of art, jewelry, and arms that they've ever plundered, down to silver teeth fillings which end up being the Captain's undoing. In the same way, I really love the conclusion for the Major. It's been an obvious question as to how the Major still appears the same as he did in World War II. For a while, especially due to a panel at the end of Deluxe Volume 2, I thought that the Major may himself be a vampire, but he sees himself as fully human. The Major has kept himself alive and youthful appearing thanks to the help of Doc, turning him into a very impressive cyborg, to be quite honest. You know, you hate to give it to a Nazi, but Doc really popped off here. The Major detests those he sees as inhuman, be they vampire, were-creature, Jew, or socialist. He insists that even if he were nothing more than a brain floating in a jar of culture fluid or memory circuits in a huge supercomputer, he would still be of his own will. He would still be a human. And after Integra finally puts this fat loser down, she insists that he is wrong. He is nothing more than a bona fide monster, one who couldn't even defeat Alucard, because he will be back. And in one of the final twists of the story, and one of my favorites in the series, especially one of my favorite literary references in the series, we finally find out how the Nazis have been making these artificial vampires with the corpse of Mina Harker. Mina Harker is the protagonist of Bram Stoker's Dracula novel, and the kind of protagonist of the Bela Lugosi film. Millennium used her corpse, and now skeleton, to extract the formula for these man-made vampires. With a command from Integra, Ceres flies the two of them back to Hellsing Manor, with the Nazis and Iscariot reduced to no threat at all. And in a conclusion that I absolutely love, we jump forward to 2030, which is only in like 4 years. Oh my god, I'm gonna be old and die one day. Integra has graduated from MILF to GILF, with Ceres now as her faithful servant. We see Iscariot wait for their 10th crusade, which they ensure will be a success, and Alucard finally returns. And after killing every life inside of him except for himself and Schrödinger, all 3,424,867, Alucard is back and can now be anywhere he wants, and has returned to his master. And the series ends with Alucard once again drinking from Integra's finger. I feel like a historian, but for something entirely fake. But to be a historian for things that are only sort of fake, let's talk about some of the historical references in Hellsing that I missed. While the idea that the Nazis or even the SS were significantly steeped in paganism, the occult, or mysticism in general is an over-exaggeration, it was a definite belief and fascination for some of those in high command, most notably Heinrich Himmler, Hitler's Luigi. Himmler was fascinated with the occult, even crafting the double lightning bolt logo for the SS from a collection of runes created by an Austrian occultist. And in one of the funniest things to have ever happened, Himmler even personally led an expedition to Tibet to find magic ice. So, to all information we have, it seems incredibly likely that Hitler did not have a Special Order 666 to create Nazi vampires. But Himmler might have. And to get back into real history, let's start where the Nazis in the series do. South America. This is pretty well known at this point, but for any Luddites who somehow stumbled upon a working internet connection, many notable Nazis fled to South America in the final months of Nazi Germany. Just probably not Hitler, in my opinion. Isolated colonies of German immigrants in South America even became very helpful for Latin American fascist regimes, like with Colonia Dignidad in Pinochet's Argentina. And in what I think is the most interesting and direct historical reference in Hellsing, is the name for the late Stuss's battalion's invasion of London, Operation Sea Lion 2. Operation Sea Lion was a planned but eventually scrapped operation for the invasion of London from Nazi-occupied France. While it was never carried out, it's theorized that the resources and manpower dedicated to even the preparation of Sea Lion led to the failure of Operation Barbarossa and the Nazis' inability to conquer the Soviet Union. And as for the fictional side, Hellsing makes a ton of references to classic literature. Mainly is obviously Bram Stoker's Dracula, but other literature, especially 19th century German literature, is referenced too. In Alucard's fight against Rip Van Winkle, the opera Der Freischütz is referenced, and the Major calls the invasion of London a Walpurgis Night, in reference to the tragedy of Faust. But history, literature, that's lame nerd stuff. Let's get back to the cool nerd stuff. The Hellsing Deluxe editions have straight up the best extra content I've seen in a deluxe, perfect, full metal, whatever fancy version of your preferred manga calls itself. Not only do you get all 3 chapters of Crossfire, the Hellsing spin-off following 2 members of Iscariot, but an afterward starring Luke and Jan Valentine in the intentionally shitty style Hirano does when he isn't popping off. You also get a title page gallery, dust jacket art, a cover gallery, and my favorite extra thing in Hellsing Deluxe Volume 3. So much insight into the weird mind of Kota Hirano through doodled covers of the volumes, and one of the most interesting about the author segments I've read. Seeing an author at their best when they're really showing their strengths is obviously great, but I also love when author just lets it all hang out. We have great character descriptions next to the shittiest doodles of them you could imagine, my favorite being Zoran Blitz's. To quote Hirano, having to draw the tattoos on her face and whatnot each and every time is such a monumental pain that she dies in the next installment. And to leave off, an excerpt from one of Hirano's weird, rambling note pages. And I quote, "You know, big breasts are great no matter how many women there are." Which I thought this spoke very true to the work of the author. Hirano does love large-breasted women, although interestingly, not a utilizer of cleavage in his art. Sort of a reverse Oda in that way. I guess that's the video.
Quick! We have to kill the boy!
How'd you know he's a vampire?
He's a vampire? Ah!
Well, like every video I make these days, that took longer than I thought it would, but I had a great time rereading and covering Hellsing for this video. If you like horror or seinen manga, like, at all really, I would really recommend that you check this out. You can read it digitally, obviously, but you can also get the not perfect edition, the deluxe editions for usually $35 on Amazon. Try and get them at your local bookstore if you can, obviously, but it's a great option. These are great collections. But that is the video for this week, y'all. I'll see you next time. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching that video. If you made it to this point, a double thank you so much. This was, like I said, a really fun video to make. I really like Hellsing. It was really fun to reread it, especially seeing, like, man, it's crazy how much, like, just how much better the art gets over the course of the series. But what I have to show up for my collection this week is Sakamoto Days Volume 10. I don't know if I've ever really talked about Sakamoto Days on this channel, but I really love it. I read it, obviously. My favorite character is probably, shoot, I forget. I think his name's Hisake, the like sniper character, or that's the name of his pet bird. I forget. I want to reread that section soon, but I actually haven't cracked into this at all because I've been working on this video. But yeah, the new Shane Zone channel will be in the description. But thank you for watching it here. I want to do more like short stuff and maybe like bring the podcast back at one point. But my voice is really gravelly and I want to go. So I'll see y'all next time. Goodbye.